Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling what might be the single most complex, time-sensitive, and doctrine-heavy undertaking in modern military operations.
Moving an entire fighting division.
Exactly, from its home station to a theater of combat. And this isn't about battlefield maneuver. It's about the staggering logistical and administrative precision required to enable that maneuver.
Right.
We are setting out to really understand the doctrine that transforms a garrisoned army into an expeditionary force.
And this deep dive is crucial because deployment is, well, it's the decisive enabling step for all large-scale combat operations. We are built on the foundation of two critical source documents here.
Okay.
First, the Army Techniques Publication 335, which dictates the core processes of Army deployment and redeployment.
The rule book.
The rulebook. And second, the indispensable practical insights from the Center for Army Lessons Learned Deployment Handbook.
So the What Really Happens document.
That's the one. Our mission today is to move past the simple sequence of events and really understand the system, the why, the pressure points, and the, often painful lessons learned that dictate success or failure when the clock is ticking.
We'll be navigating the 4 phases of the joint deployment process, from initial planning right through to force integration in the theater. We're going to spend a good portion of our time dissecting how the Army breaks that crucial movement phase down.
Into the Fort-to-Port and Port-to-Port segments.
Yes, because as the lessons learned, documents make abundantly clear that first segment, just getting off the installation, is where most deployments can grind to a halt.
That Fort-to-Port friction is real. But if you look at the larger context, the deployment process is the functional backbone of being an expeditionary army. It's the mechanism that translates national will into combat power, delivered precisely where and when a joint force commander needs it.
It's a massive physics problem.
It is. You're trying to impose order on thousands of pieces of cargo, civilian rail companies, military sea lift, and air transport assets, all moving in what's supposed to be perfect synchronization.
Let's start with the fundamental terminology then. What does it actually mean for the Army to be truly expeditionary, and how does deployment fit into the much larger concept of force projection?
So the core concept on expeditionary army, as laid out in the Army's foundational doctrine, Field Manual 3.0, is really about capability. It means deploying on short notice, often to austere locations.
Places with no infrastructure, basically.
Minimal or non-existent, yeah. And critically, being able to immediately conduct and sustain protracted combat operations. This isn't just about showing up. It's about showing up, ready to fight, and stay in the fight.
So if the expeditionary army is the capability, then force projection is the strategic act.
Precisely. Force projection is the overarching mechanism that allows the nation to deploy, employ, and sustain military forces globally. And the sources stress that these 3 components, deployment, employment, and sustainment, they're inextricably linked.
You can't plan one without the others.
You can't. You can't plan deployment successfully without understanding the employment concept, what the unit will do when it gets there, and you can't succeed without sustainment being built into the deployment timeline from day one. They overlap, they repeat, they run simultaneously.
It sounds as deployment is more than just loading trucks. It really sets the entire timeline and physical limits for the commander's plan.
It absolutely does. The successful closing of the force, meaning delivering all personnel and equipment, directly impacts the combat power available to the geographic combatant commander. If the unit's logistics train is delayed, the combat forces that arrived by air can't fight for long.
Right, they run out of supplies.
And if the heavy equipment is delayed, the division is only fighting with its light capability. Deployment is the non-negotiable prerequisite to the employment phase.
And this staggering task relies on synchronization across the government, which the doctrine refers to as unified action.
Unified action is the engine here. Is defined as the synchronization, coordination, and integration of activities among governmental and non-governmental entities with military operations to achieve unity of effort.
Okay, break that down. What does that look like in practice?
Think about what deployment entails.
Right.
It involves the Army, obviously, but also the Air Mobility Command for airlift, Military Sea Lift Command for sea transport, the Defense Logistics Agency for supplies.
And civilian companies, too.
Huge civilian involvement. The commercial rail and trucking industry for that Fort-to-Port movement, and often foreign customs and host nation support agencies. It's a massive enterprise.
That sounds less like a synchronized ballet and more like managing a dozen independent contractors all moving at different speeds toward the same distant goal.
That's a good analogy for the difficulty of achieving unity of effort. Unity of effort is cooperation toward common objectives, which is the result of successful unified action. even when those participants are not in the same chain of command.
So, to manage this complexity, the Army Techniques Publication 335 lays out 4 non-negotiable principles. Let's walk through them. Precision, synchronization, knowledge, and speed.
Correct.
Let's start with precision, because on the surface, it sounds bureaucratic, but you argue it drives speed.
Precision is absolutely foundational, and it applies to every single piece of data associated with the unit and its equipment. The payoff for high precision is high speed.
What kind of data are we talking about?
We're talking about ensuring the unit deployment lists are maintained with accurate weights, dimensions, quantities, and cubic volume for every single item deploying.
Why does a few inches or a few pounds matter so much in the grand scheme of moving a tank?
It matters because that data feeds the strategic lift scheduling system. If the data is imprecise, say a piece of equipment's stated width is incorrect, the wrong aircraft or vessel type may be assigned against the requirement.
And then it just won't fit.
It physically cannot load. You end up with what's called frustrated cargo left sitting on the pier. That introduces massive friction, delays loading, jeopardizes safety, and ultimately stalls the entire deployment timeline.
So the accuracy of a spreadsheet maintained by a unit movement officer ultimately impacts the timing of combat power arrival. That's a powerful connection.
It is.
And that precision enables synchronization.
It does. Synchronization means all deployment activities must be explicitly coordinated among deploying units, support staffs, civilian agencies, and other military services. It's about maximizing scarce lift assets and minimizing wait times.
And how do you practice that?
The doctrine points out that a key enabler is integrating the installation deployment support plan, the installation's blueprint, with unit training exercises, specifically a deployment readiness exercise.
So you don't just train the unit, you train the entire installation system to respond.
Exactly, simultaneously.
Next, we have knowledge. In a fight where information superiority is key, what does knowledge mean specifically in the deployment context?
Knowledge is the critical awareness piece. It ensures deploying forces know what, where, and when capabilities are needed, and crucially, where those capabilities currently are.
So trekking your stuff.
It requires accurate, timely, and accessible information, leveraging systems like in-transit visibility. The commander needs an accurate force tracking picture to know exactly where their combat power is located, from the home station marshalling yard, across the ocean, and into the tactical assembly area.
That visibility is a huge operational advantage, but it also sounds like a vulnerability.
That's where the strategic implication comes in. As the sources remind us, the deployment process itself can be viewed by the enemy in large-scale combat operations as a potential center of gravity to attack.
If they can see you, they can hit you.
Precisely. If we have knowledge, we can avoid concentration and speed up the process. A lack of knowledge means massive uncertainty and delays.
Which flows directly into the final principle, speed.
And speed isn't about hurrying. It's about efficiency. Operational speed is measured by the deployment system's ability to deliver combat power where and when the Joint Force Commander requires it. A smooth deployment reduces the time the force spends vulnerable in staging areas.
The joint community breaks the entire operation down into 4 phases. Can you walk us through those and then explain the Army's unique segmentation within that structure?
Of course. The 4 joint phases are, in order, deployment planning, pre-deployment activities, movement, and then joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration. It looks linear, but in reality, planning never truly ends.
And the Army segments Phase 3 movement specifically.
That's the critical Army alignment. We segment movement into 2 distinct phases that define responsibility and strategic lift assets, Fort-to-Port and Port-to-Port.
Okay, what's the difference?
Fort-to-Port is the initial segment. The unit moves from its home station, the installation, or fort, to the designated port of embarkation, whether that's an aerial port or a seaport. This is primarily an Army and Installation Management Command responsibility.
Using trucks and trains.
Right. Organic or commercial ground transport.
Right.
Then port-to-port is the strategic lift segment. This is the movement from the port of embarkation to the designated theater port of debarkation.
And that's where the big planes and ships come in.
That phase is handled entirely by the United States Transportation Command, using strategic airlift from Air Mobility Command or strategic sea lift from Military Sea Lift Command.
So the entire sequence starts with the employment concept. Planning dictates the sequence.
Absolutely. The employment concept dictates what capabilities are needed, where, and when. Proper planning involves meticulous time phasing, which is documented in the time-phased force deployment data.
And the timing is complex.
It is. Since sea lift takes weeks and airlift takes days, this sequencing is critical. The sources emphasize that sea lift cargo generally must leave before the troops to ensure the equipment is available when they land.
Because if troops arrive first,
They have to wait for weeks for their equipment, and you have a massive sustainment and force protection problem on your hands.
and that's where the advance party comes in.
Exactly. An advance party consisting of key personnel maintenance, logistics, comms experts must fly in early to receive, organize, and prepare the equipment for the main body. They're the initial footprint in the theater.
Let's move into phase 2, pre-deployment activities. This sounds like the massive administrative and training effort that happens right after a unit gets its warning order.
It is the operational heavy lifting before any physical movement begins, and it is where the Center for Army Lessons Learned documentation finds the most systemic friction.
This is where things go wrong.
This is where they start to go wrong. Commanders, staffs, and units must plan, train, and rehearse constantly. They must review and adjust their mission-essential task list to specifically include mobilization and deployment tasks. You can't just expect a unit to flawlessly switch gears from maneuver training to deployment execution overnight.
So what document serves as the absolute cornerstone of this administrative planning?
The unit deployment list. This is non-negotiable. It is the accurate, commander-validated list of every single person and piece of equipment deploying.
And that's all maintained in a specific system.
Yes, it's developed and maintained in the transportation coordinators. Automated information for movement system 2, often just called the unit data management system.
Why is that validation step by the commander so critical?
Because the unit deployment list is used to manifest units for deployment, verify compliance with theater capacity limits, and, most importantly, update the time phase force deployment data so that the right aircraft and ships can be scheduled.
So if the commander signs off on a bad list,
If the commander signs off on a list where the weight of a tank is wrong or 5 critical support vehicles are missing, the entire deployment timeline is built on a dangerous lie. It's an exercise in discipline.
so once the alert drops, how do units manage the ensuing logistical hurricane?
They rely on the N-hour sequence list. This is an essential time sequence checklist that guides units from the planning phase through pre-deployment activities. The list details tasks that supporting organizations and personnel must perform prior to and immediately following the formal notification time, or N-hour.
Can you give us a few examples of the tasks that would show up on that list?
Certainly. Tasks include submitting initial unit status reports, immediately updating the unit deployment lists in the unit data management system, requesting priority maintenance support for any broken equipment.
Got to get everything fixed before it leaves.
You do. And placing immediate orders for the necessary materials for blocking, bracing, packing, crating, and tie-down. That material needs to be ordered, delivered, and applied before anything moves to the port. And if that ordering is late, everything stops.
Beyond the general staff work, pre-deployment readiness hinges on specialized school-trained personnel. This sounds like a key readiness challenge.
It is. You need a dedicated, trained cadre. We're talking about mobility officers, transportation management coordinators, unit movement officers, hazardous cargo certifiers, container control officers, and airload planners.
And if those people aren't trained,
If these slots are vacant or filled by individuals who haven't received official training, deployment readiness immediately suffers because the data input, the inspection process, or the loading execution will fail to meet compliance standards.
for the individual soldier, there is the soldier readiness processing. What does that encompass?
Soldier readiness processing ensures individual deployability. It encompasses crucial administrative, medical, and dental checks.
The basics.
The basics, but they're critical. Key tasks include updating the record of emergency data, verifying common access cards, and ensuring dental classifications are ready, meaning classification 1 or 2.
Why is dental so important?
If a soldier has a dental classification 3, meaning emergency dental treatment is likely within 12 months, they are not administratively ready to deploy. This process mitigates the risk of a soldier needing a high-priority medical evacuation unnecessarily once in theater.
Let's discuss the extremely serious role of the hazardous cargo certifier. What are the doctrine's requirements here?
The requirements are precise and non-negotiable because the consequences of error are severe. Think about transporting explosives or fuel by air or sea.
Right.
Each unit, down to company or detachment level, requires at least 2 trained individuals, a primary and an alternate, designated in writing as hazardous cargo certifying officials.
And what's their specific job?
Their role is pivotal. They must personally inspect and sign the documentation, confirming that the shipment is properly prepared, packaged, and marked in strict accordance with national and international regulations. It's a job that carries personal liability for safety.
Doctrine mandates specific programs to enforce this readiness discipline. How does command ownership start before we even get to the rehearsal phase?
It starts with the Command Deployment Discipline Program. This is not just an inspection, it is a proactive commander's tool designed to evaluate, enhance, and maintain unit deployment readiness discipline. It focuses on compliance and policy adherence.
Making sure they're doing the little things right all the time.
All the time, even when not alerted. A unit with a robust command deployment discipline program is a unit that executes deployment efficiently.
And the ultimate test of readiness is the deployment readiness exercise. They come in 3 levels, right?
That's right. These exercises assess readiness and execution capability by simulating various deployment steps.
So level 1, what's that?
Level 1 deployment readiness exercise is the simplest. It focuses on administrative and notification procedures. It tests recall rosters. Are the phone numbers current? It forces units to conduct Level 1 soldier readiness processing tasks, and it ensures key teams can assemble rapidly.
What is level 2 at?
Level 2 is where the rubber meets the road logistically. It includes all Level 1 activities, but mandates the unit conduct complete loadout operations using a representative sample of unit equipment. They often use transportation mock-ups outlines painted on the ground, representing the footprint of a cargo aircraft or vessel cargo deck.
So they're physically practicing loading.
Yes, to validate the load plans. Can the unit properly pack its containers? Are the measurements correct? This exercise tells the commander if the precision data in the unit data management system is actually accurate.
And level 3 is essentially a full dress rehearsal.
Level 3 is essential for Army deployment readiness because it tests the entire system. It requires the unit to actually deploy, executing the fort-to-port movement, working through the joint interface at the port, executing a training mission, and then redeploying.
It's the only way to really know if you can do it.
It's the only way that truly validates the unit's reception, staging, onward movement, and integration capacity at the receiving end.
The Center for Army Lessons Learned emphasizes the painful consequences of data failure during these pre-deployment phases. What are the common data pitfalls?
The recurring lesson is that unit movement data accuracy must be certified against the computerized movement planning and status system, the joint validation system. Late unit deployment list validation is a primary cause of deployment failure because it delays obtaining proper fort-to-port conveyances, the rail cars and commercial trucks, and the actual strategic vessels. If the data isn't locked down, no one can contract the lift.
It sounds like the data in the unit data management system is the currency needed to book the train ticket.
That's exactly right. If the booking is late, the unit will miss its port call order. The lessons also reveal that units that conduct regular deployment readiness exercises consistently produce superior load plans.
And the ones that don't?
The ones that rely on memory or last year's data always fail to account for new equipment or last-minute changes.
Let's address command ownership again. The doctrine pushes back on the idea that deployment is purely a logistics function. Why the emphasis on the operations officer?
The sources stress that command ownership must reside with the operations officer, the G3 or S3. They should control unit movement operations and conduct them as an operational task, not a logistics task.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because movement is dictated by the concept of operations.
Mm-hmm.
What combat power needs to arrive first? Where? When? That is an operational sequencing decision, not a logistical one. The logistics section supports the movement, but the operations section must integrate the movement plan into the overall military decision-making process.
Now we enter phase 3, movement. We're focusing first on the crucial fort-to-port segment, which is the transition from the relatively controlled environment of the garrison to the joint system.
The fort-to-port segment is the bridge. It begins with those synchronized pre-deployment activities and ends when the strategic mobility platform, the aircraft or vessel, departs the port of embarkation.
How is the choice of ground transportation road versus role made for this segment?
That decision is complex. Wheeled vehicles often move by convoy or commercial line haul. Tracked vehicles, however, almost exclusively move by rail due to weight restrictions. The final mode selection is determined by the installation unit movement coordinator based on distance, capacity, infrastructure, and the specific port call time.
The installation itself moves mountains to support this phase. What is the operational blueprint that governs the installation's efforts?
That's the Installation Deployment Support Plan. This is a non-deploying unit's most important document. It's a working plan providing an overview of synchronized deployment processes, policies, events, and activities both on and off the installation.
And who is the pivotal synchronization point for the unit on the installation?
That's the Installation Transportation Officer, usually subordinate to the Logistics Readiness Center. The Installation Transportation Officer is indispensable. They provide local deployment guidance, critically process all convoy clearances and special hauling permits.
All the civilian paperwork needed to move military gear.
Exactly. They ensure equipment has proper markings and coordinate the commercial transportation carriers. They're the link between the civilian transportation world and the military.
On the installation, the equipment usually moves through centralized areas before it hits the road. Why the centralization?
Deploying unit equipment typically moves from the unit's motor pool to a marshaling and staging area. These central locations facilitate standardized processing. Functions here include verification of the unit movement data against the physical load, meticulous technical inspection.
To make sure it's safe to transport.
Correct. And configuring the equipment for movement. This centralization ensures every unit meets the same standard before moving to the port.
The Center for Army Lessons Learned documentation is brutal about the recurring friction points in this phase. Let's focus on the three major ones: equipment readiness, fuel, and labeling.
These are the administrative failures that have the largest operational consequences.
Starting with equipment readiness, if something breaks down on the way to the port, or worse, at the port itself, the impact is massive.
Broken equipment adversely affects seaport download and ship upload operations because it becomes an immobilized piece of freight. It can't move itself into the vessel's hold.
So what's the solution?
A key solution, according to the sources, is ensuring a robust unit maintenance and recovery element is deployed early to the seaport of embarkation. Maintainers must know the maintenance status and required repair parts for every single piece of equipment. They fix it before it gets on the ship.
And let's reiterate the specific fuel requirement, because this one sounds like a small detail that causes massive chaos.
It causes huge operational friction. The doctrine is absolutely explicit. All departing unit equipment must have 3/4 of a tank of fuel and be clearly marked.
And if they don't?
The Center for Army Lessons Learned documented instances where fuel shortages in tracked vehicles resulted in them being non-mission capable immediately upon arrival. They literally had to be lifted onto trains or towed because they couldn't drive themselves off the ship.
Which paralyzes the port.
Completely. And it all goes back to a failure at the home station.
Finally, documentation and labeling in the real world exposed to the elements.
Weather, wind, rain, high humidity can and will destroy standard paper-based military shipping labels. Units must anticipate this and use Mylar military shipping labels. These weather-resistant labels protect the scanned data in all conditions.
Once the Fort-to-Port movement is complete, the Strategic Lift Segment Port-to-Port takes over, governed by the Strategic Mobility Triad. What are the three components?
They are Strategic Airlift, Strategic Sea Lift, and Army Prepositioned Stocks. These three elements work in concert to provide global force projection.
Let's break down the massive trade-off between strategic airlift and sea lift.
Okay, so Strategic Airlift, managed by Air Mobility Command, is for transporting light, high-priority forces, passengers, and critical supplies. Its advantages are speed and flexibility.
But it can't carry much.
Limited capacity and very high cost. It handles the advanced party, minimum necessary equipment, and highly specialized capabilities.
And strategic sea lift, which moves the bulk of the division.
Sea Lift, managed by Military Sea Lift Command, moves the vast majority of unit equipment, historically around 90% of the total cargo volume. It is slow and less flexible, but it offers unparalleled capacity and it's significantly cheaper. It's the only way to deliver the heavy brigade combat teams.
And where do Army prepositioned stocks fit in?
Army prepositioned stocks are the ultimate force multiplier for deployment speed. They are large caches of heavy equipment and supplies strategically stored around the world. Their primary purpose is to drastically reduce the initial amount of strategic lift required.
So you fly the people in and their tanks are already waiting for them.
That's the idea. It transforms the deployment from moving everything to moving personnel and minimal gear. This cuts weeks, sometimes months, off the deployment timeline.
We've established that precision and knowledge are required deployment principles, that high standard relies entirely on automated systems. We need to understand the data flow.
That's right. The deployment process is defined by the data inputs. We are primarily concerned with the transportation coordinators, automated information for Movement System 2, the computerized movement planning and status system, and the Global Air Transportation Execution System surface.
Let's start with the unit level system.
That is the Transportation Coordinator's Automated Information for Movement System 2. It is the Army's system of record for deployment documentation. It's where the unit movement officer enters, prepares, and maintains all the movement documentation, including that vital unit deployment list.
How does that raw data then transition to the joint world to actually schedule the C-17s and the cargo ships?
The data flows through the computerized movement planning and status system. This system receives the movement data from the unit data management system, and its critical role is validation. It runs checks for errors,
Quality control.
the necessary quality control and standardization layer. It then uploads that validated, standardized data to the Joint Operation Planning and Execution System, which uses it to create the time phase force deployment data.
And finally, the system that manages surface cargo at the ports.
That's the Global Air Transportation Execution System surface. This is the Military Surface Deployment and Distribution Command's worldwide system, specifically for managing cargo export and import at waterports.
All these data systems aim to achieve in-transit visibility. Give us the official definition.
In-transit visibility is defined as the ability to track the identity, status, and location of Department of Defense units, cargo, and personnel from origin to destination.
And this capability relies on a suite of hardware known as automatic identification technology.
Correct. The Automatic Identification Technology Suite includes the physical components, radio frequency tags, military shipping labels, the weather-resistant kind, and smart cards like the Common Access Card.
And the doctrine is extremely prescriptive on where these tags and labels must be placed. Let's review the standards.
These standards are mandated globally. For vehicles, they must be marked with one radio frequency tag on the front grille or bumper and 2 military shipping labels, one on the left front bumper and one on the left door.
And for containers?
Containers must have one radio frequency tag attached over the door or to the locking bar on the upper right side, and 2 military shipping labels, one on the door and one on the right side.
So we've moved the force from the home station to the theater. Now we enter phase 4. Reception, staging, onward movement, and integration.
This is where the force officially transitions from transported cargo to combat power. The goal here is simple but immense: to rapidly combine and integrate arriving elements into combat power that can be employed by the geographic combatant commander.
Can you define the 4 distinct segments of this process?
Reception is the initial step, unloading personnel and equipment from the ships and planes. Staging is where the force organizes itself, often at an intermediate staging base.
What's that?
A secure, temporary base established near the area of operations. It's needed because ports don't have enough space to reassemble combat units.
Okay, so reception, staging.
Then onward movement, which is the physical relocation of units to the final tactical assembly area. And finally, integration. This is the synchronized transfer of units into an operational commander's force.
This sounds like the riskiest part of the whole process.
It is the moment of greatest vulnerability. The doctrine stresses that the arriving force is most vulnerable when closing on the port of debarkation and throughout this whole process. The force is centralized, organized, and often static, making it an ideal target.
Let's revisit the critical lesson about fuel shortages, because the Center for Army Lessons Learned emphasizes this failure point specifically in this phase.
It's the single most common preventable failure point. The major issue identified during reception, staging, onward movement, and integration is the arrival of equipment, particularly tracked vehicles, with critically low fuel levels.
So the same problem from the Fort-to-Port phase comes back to haunt them.
It does, with even bigger consequences. If a vehicle can't drive itself out of the port marshaling area, it creates immediate congestion. The consequence: the vehicle is non-mission capable until refueled, causing bottlenecks that delay every subsequent unit arriving.
And that delay underscores why maintenance support must be immediate upon arrival.
Absolutely. Maintenance contact teams must be available and positioned to perform necessary repairs immediately. An immobile piece of equipment in a port is a crisis.
There is also the fundamental complexity caused by the speed differential of strategic lift, the sequencing of forces.
This is the core challenge. Because air is so much faster than sea, troops and equipment must be sequenced to arrive nearly simultaneously at the staging area.
If troops arrive too early, they're just waiting around.
They are vulnerable and strain life support resources, essentially becoming refugees. If equipment arrives too early, it clogs the port and staging bases.
That sequencing decision, the force mix, is crucial. Do you prioritize combat forces first, or the support elements required to clear the port?
The Center for Army Lessons Learned warns against front-loading the time-phased force deployment data only with combat forces. Doing so may jeopardize the commander's ability to build combat power as essential sustainment units. The port clearance teams, the heavy equipment transport companies, are delayed.
So you need the logistics tail in place first.
Early deployment of those critical support units, even if it delays the arrival of some initial fighting elements, often pays exponential dividends later by speeding the flow and readiness of the entire force.
We've traveled from the initial command decision to update personnel records in the unit data management system all the way to achieving force closure in the theater of operations. The resounding theme across all the sources is that doctrine is only as effective as the discipline and command ownership applied by leaders at every echelon.
That is the truth. The Center for Army Lessons Learned emphasizes that precision data input, rigorous training exercises, and commanders treating movement as an operational task are the only ways to avoid the friction points.
And those friction points, maintenance failures, incorrect labeling, critical fuel shortages, they have real operational costs.
They translate directly into delays in force integration in theater, potentially costing lives and operational windows.
The immense effort required just to deliver combat power to the fight underscores why deployment is not merely a logistical checklist. It is a highly vulnerable, decisive enabling step that determines whether the commander's concept of employment is even feasible.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, deployment is viewed by any competent adversary as a potential center of gravity. Disruption, whether through cyber interference targeting the data systems we discussed, or physical attack on ports, is a viable enemy course of action.
So considering the imperative of rapid force projection, how does the doctrine's reliance on precise, timely human input in systems like the transportation coordinators, automated information from movement system to EPI scale when facing global simultaneous deployments? We have a doctrine that requires meticulous attention to detail at the lowest level to enable global speed. But if an adversary targets the installation's network or disrupts the civilian rail carriers relied upon for fort-to-port movement, that entire system is compromised. The vulnerability of accurate manual inputs under duress demands constant attention and evolution in our doctrine. That is the long-term challenge facing the Expeditionary Army.